How do you see the journalism industry evolving? What new paradigms will come forth as the web sort of continues to evolve?
Yeah, I think actually the journalism industry has been evolving at an incredible pace so far, and it's really even hard to predict where it's going to go in the future. And I think that's what makes it so exciting and so challenging at the same time. What we see is obviously tools and technology moving at just an incredible pace, very difficult to keep up with, and also difficult to figure out how to use it in the best ways. And that's part of the challenge that we have in trying to keep our membership and journalists in general in pace with technology. And that's probably what we consider our main job is training, making sure that people feel comfortable with it, but then keeping ahead of it so that we're able to show people what's coming next and why it might be important.
So you kind of answered my second question, but maybe if you wanted to elaborate at all, how is ONA kind of dealing with the constant transformations, your role in just sort of training people and staying ahead of the game and kind of anticipating new changes?
Well, in some respects, just the nature of the organization, we started 11 years ago now. It was started by some very forward-thinking folks, and that's pretty much been the way it's evolved, which is great. Because the folks who are on the board, the people who put the conference on, who work on the conference, the people who do our training, all are one step ahead, and that's what makes us capable of saying we see what's coming down the pike, and we also see that we need to be able to teach this to folks. So whether it's the tools and technology, or whether it's what arises, the journalistic issues that arise from those tools and technology, that's the other piece of it is, how do you still do quality journalism when you're doing 24/7 journalism, when you're doing it on all these different devices, and you need to figure it out. So what we try to do is to call on the folks who are not only just doing this journalism every single day, but are also looking ahead at what's coming down the pike and figuring out how to use those particular tools. And the really great thing about it is that we don't have all the answers, and we know we don't have all the answers. We're going to experiment, we're going to try, we're going to fail. And I think that's probably one of the greatest things I think about journalism today, is you're not afraid to fail.
So you touched on it just then, but what is your take on, news agencies they're investing in technology and they're investing in kind of web developers instead of investing in journalists, which could potentially compromise well-reported, accurate journalism. Mm-hmm. How do you see that kind of affecting the future of journalism?
I think media companies need to, and they are, I think, they're starting to realize that this is what they need to do. They need to understand that a journalist nowadays has to be a jack of all trades, and that you need to start to develop journalists who understand the development piece of it, the web development piece, the technology of it, and can also do the reporting. And I think that's what J schools are doing now. They're starting to turn out students and journalists who understand a lot more. They work with the back end and the front end. They're not afraid of either one of them. For now, though, that transition period, it's a rough one. There's no doubt about it. But I do think that the only way that it's going to work is if we take the journalists who have all of those qualities of the veteran journalist, who know newsrooms, who know the rules of journalism, have been taught the ethics and the legality, and put them in the room with the people who are learning to use who already know how to use the technology, but are learning to do the journalism. And that's what we try to do at ONA. We have trainings where we open the doors up to everybody, and we say, come in, it's a big tent, and you can learn from each other as well as learn from us.
Do you think, though, at the root of everything, we have all of this technology going on, and Web 2.0, and then citizen journalism and all of that, but at the root of it, it's important to have a base in a strong journalistic ethic. Do you think that might get lost? Don't you think it's kind of being threatened?
No, I think it's a fear, and I'm not saying it's not a valid fear, but I work with journalists every day, and I don't meet many journalists who have a very casual attitude towards journalistic ethics or the value of what they do. I think one of the reasons why people are so excited about this conference is because we know that and because we celebrate that. A lot of other meetings or gatherings of journalists, there's a lot of time spent on journalism is going to die. You know, we're going to lose the best of journalism, and I think that's it's just a waste of time. I mean, I don't understand that, because there are people doing good journalism every single day. There are people doing bad journalism every single day, but they were doing that before the web. I mean, there was plenty of bad journalism being done. So let's just embrace what we have right now and try to make it the best we can.
So with the age of the web and there being loads of citizen journalists out there reporting on their iPhones, and then there's, you know, journalists like myself who are going to grad school and getting trained, and do you see kind of conflicts arising moving forward between these kind of two bodies of journalists? I saw
more conflicts 3 years ago at our conferences, where people tended to divide into two different groups literally at the conferences. You could see where they didn't intermingle at all. I see much less of that now. I see people in the same room who may disagree with each other about things, but there's a conversation going on now, and I think there's more respect going on now.
Who were the two groups?
I think it was the veteran journalists, the old school journalists, and the sort of the folks who were experimenting with new technology, or who may not have had the journalism background. Some bloggers, community journalists. And at that time, I guess there weren't so many folks who were just working with tablets or mobile devices. But now I think what's happening is journalists are getting their coverage and their stories out on all these devices, and they're seeing the wonder of it. And I think that's breaking down those barriers a lot faster than they might otherwise have been broken.
Great. Okay, just to keep moving forward. So just to kind of bring Europe into the picture here, mm-hmm. what do you see the differences between online journalism between European countries and the U.S.?
Well, it's interesting because Europe is way ahead in a lot of respects. I think mobile, there's no question about it. You know, it's a lot more accepted. It's more well used and used well, I think. I think that there's also a deep respect depending on where you're talking about in Europe, for the values of journalism. And I think that there's a real interest in making sure that that this is what I'm finding now, is that there's more of a collegial or more of an interchange of information between American journalists and European journalists. And what I'm seeing too is that American journalists seem to be more open to the idea that they need to learn more about how European journalists are using, not only using technology, but how different countries are doing journalism, because there's different. What I'm seeing is that there's different values placed on the type of journalism being done depending on what country you're in, and I think there's a lot to be learned on both sides.
What do you? I guess you pointed out sort of the mobile aspect, like Europe being ahead on that front. Mm-hmm. The U.S. is ahead on which front? No, it's like the battle.
Yeah, it's going to start a war. But I think there may be some of the daily workings of journalism that American journalists are a little bit more comfortable with, kind of breaking the rules, if that makes sense.
How do you see taking an ONA conference abroad to Europe anytime soon?
Oh yeah, we're really we're very excited about it, because we just in the last 2 years have starting to build up our international community. It's nowhere near what it should be, but we now have 5 country chairs. We have a chair in France, we have a chair in Italy, we have a chair in Brazil, we have a chair in Canada, and we have a chair in London. London which would make the most sense. London and Canada are probably our most active international countries. But what we'd like to do, and I'm thinking we may do this next year, is to at least have a mini conference that would be hosted and sponsored by ONA. And then, because what we're finding out this year is that our international attendees are growing. Actually fairly large number of international attendees this year here. So obviously.
What do you hope to achieve with having international ties is? Like, do you hope that a common standard might take shape, or just encouraging sort of across, I don't know, pollination of, you know, shared sort of values in journalism? Like, what's the sort of overarching goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think across the pollination of shared values is a nice goal, but there's just a lot to be learned on both sides. I think I'm not sure about some kind of of common standards. I think it would just be way too complex for that. It's hard enough to do that in the United States alone. So I would just say that there's a lot to be learned on both sides. There's a lot of sharing that can go on, and is going on actually. This is probably the most international conference we've had, both in the attendee piece of it and our panelists, and they're bringing a wealth of experience to the table.
So just as a final wrapping up question, you know, the buzz, at least with, you know, young journalists in my program, is like, how do you make this career sustainable? What are what do you kind of see as like an ideal business model, like as, I don't know, as a freelance journalist or someone venturing out wanting to do print, or you mentioned the jack of all trades, that being like an important asset to be able to do, you know, a multitude of things, but just curious what your...
Yeah, I think, well, I do. I think you said you're going to graduate school now, right? And you're trying to learn more about journalism, and obviously you have these skills. So to me, that's the perfect journalist. When a journalist comes into the room for an interview, what you want to hear from them is, I know how to do this, 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 and this. And I also know how to produce good journalism. I know how to write a story. I know how to cover a fire. I know how to, whatever it is that you need them to do. I think that's the journalist of the future. And it's really not the journalist of the future. It's journalists we're seeing now. We're having a career summit and job fair tomorrow. And I'm sure that, I don't know if you're going to be around, but if you have time, you should interview the folks who are going to be at that job fair, because the ones who are going to show up for the recruitment area of it from 1:30 to 4 are going to be the people who are doing it. You know, they're changing the rules about how the job is done.
Where did you get your training? What's your background?
I started at a newspaper. I did not have journalism as a background. I actually was music. But I needed a job, and I started at a newspaper, a very small newspaper in New Jersey. And when I started, I was actually a librarian. I took care of the morgue, as they called it. And then I moved into just writing a story, a front page story, basically for a newspaper, and I just fell in love with it. And it wasn't a job to me at all. I mean, and to a certain extent, it still isn't. I mean, it's changed a lot, obviously, but you could see as I sort of progressed through journalism, you could see the evolution of it as I think as early as sort of the mid-1990s, how things were changing and where it was going, and I was really excited by that. I never thought to myself, journalism is dying. Not once, ever.
Can you just say your first and last name and your role?
Sure. My name is Jane McDonnell. I'm the Executive Director of the Online News Association.